Hi, welcome to Funds TV. My name's Hein-Hartmann, this is Tony Stenning. Actually, I met Tony a few months ago in a conference where he presented a very interesting discussion and debate around how the asset management industry and the pension fund industry actually interacts with their end users. So Tony, who's actually the head of the retail business in the UK and also is responsible for the general Blackrock approach to the savings and investments business, will be here today to talk to us a little bit more and hopefully humanise the approach to the way that people save. So thanks for coming along today.
Pleasure, thank you.
So one of the things that you touched upon actually in your talk that I saw was the approach that you have as a business towards reaching your end clients. Can you maybe explain a bit more to the people watching this just about that?
Sure. This is a really important aspect of what financial services generally, but also specifically asset managers need to do. We're quite often, my business is broadly a B2B, a business-to-business operation. So we're once, maybe twice removed from the end client, the individual. But we really need to understand what is driving their habits, what is driving their concerns, what are they looking to do with their money. Because if we don't have that insight, we're going to get it completely wrong in terms of the products and solutions and the overall proposition that we try to deliver to them. Because we go and survey 31,000 individuals around the world every year. That's in 20 countries, over 13,000 in Europe, across 8 countries, 4,000 plus in the UK. Not necessarily clients of Blackrock, in fact that is not one of the criteria, but what is driving their decisions, what are their fears, what are their hopes, what are their needs, and that helps us understand and hopefully therefore deliver the right outcome to them. So what you heard me talking about at the conference the other day was how do we make saving as easy as it to get into debt. That's a real challenge that we hear time and again from investors. It's manifested itself in the huge cash balances that individuals have outside of their pensions. If they have a pension, they're typically about 2/3 in cash. So whether that's in the UK, in continental Europe, in America, broadly very similar. And generally because they fear investing, they genuinely fear it. You ask them, what does it make you feel to invest? They feel cautious, they feel worried, they feel nervous. 60% of people think it's like gambling. How do you feel when you put money in the bank? I feel confident, I feel secure, I feel good. So there's a real education miss here, as well as the need to help people understand how they manage for the long term.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point, and to be honest, that's one of the key drivers for actually creating the site that we're working on at the moment. One of the things that we felt as a company and as a team is that the asset management industry isn't very well understood, and I think there's a general fear there because of the lack of education. So what would you say is going to be a focus of the team at Blackrock in terms of harnessing that and trying to improve that relationship with your end clients?
It was a real need to re-engage with investors and people, individuals, you and me. We could give us, all these names, investors, consumers, the people, you and I, they need our help, and that's really important from a financial services perspective. At Blackrock, we take our fiduciary responsibility incredibly important. It's not how much money you have with us. We treat your pound is equal to someone who may have multi-millions with us as an institutional investor, because ultimately behind that money are people, whether it's a government investing on behalf of its citizens or it's a company investing on behalf of its pensioners, its members, or you or I putting money into our ISA or our individual pension. So you have to consider the implications of what you do for the teachers, the firefighters, the doctors, because that's really important. That's why we do the investor pulse. Making, I say, that step, what are we doing about it? Never waste a good crisis, as a former boss of mine said, and he was absolutely right. Post the financial crisis, the whole financial services industry is coming together to really understand now that we're not trusted and that we're not helping individuals secure their better financial future. That's really important. That has significant implications for society in general, social cohesion, but even more than that, the economic implication of people perhaps reaching retirement with not enough money to live on, to spend as the way they've done. So that won't have big implications to jobs, which will lead to that point I made about social cohesion. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's make at your point of contact, we were talking about how digitally can we create some sort of ID to enable you to, within almost 1 or 2 clicks, be identified as yourself and make that investment. At the moment you can get a credit card and you can get a loan very swiftly and go and spend that money, but you can't save the same level of money, and it's a real dichotomy, and we need to start there, and that's where we're very much working on, because if we can make that simpler, you can take some cost out of the system that can be passed on to individuals in better returns. Great news. But more importantly, we can reinvest that money into the education programs. There was a study last year that suggests that you've already formed your base kind of personal finance ideas by the age of 7.
Really?
Absolutely, through your
Very
parents.
young.
It's very young. And so we need to start early, you need to start consistently and deliver this message and reinforce it every time there's a life event. So I'm not suggesting people in kindergarten should be inculcated and read and recount after me 1,000 times I will invest in a pension. But if you start early and get the basics there, you can reinforce that perhaps when you leave school, perhaps when you get your first job, when you buy your first house, when you have your first child. You can just reinforce it continually. The knowledge is in our industry. In the UK, we've put personal finance onto the education agenda. There's no money being put into it. The local education authorities can opt out. There's only 45% of them that are actually doing it. Last time I looked, teachers are pretty busy. They need some help to deliver that message, and that's in financial services, and I think we can do that.
There's a big gap between the industry and everybody who's sort of outside the industry at the moment, and there aren't really any initiatives that really successfully connect with normal people who are not already in some way related to this industry. And it's a great shame, because obviously therein lies the big opportunity, both commercially but secondly for society. Because obviously we've never had a problem as big as this before, and the problem's only getting worse. And I think you're right, because you don't learn about financial education until really you're past university, when unfortunately so many people have already entered into debt. And I think we were having a very interesting conversation offline before, really just about, and you made a very interesting point, that if you would be able to make it as easy for people to save as it is for them to get into debt, then actually when we get to those periods in our lives, we'll be much more financially aware. So one of the interesting groups in our society is obviously the millennials, which is now this quite large part of our population and will live the longest really than any of the other age groups that we've seen. Are you seeing any major trends with this particular age group?
This is wonderful news, and we're all living longer. This is great news. We're going to spend a lot more time with our grandchildren, maybe our great-grandchildren. That's great news. The trouble with that, and what we're seeing, is that there's a challenge, particularly for this age group, to visualise themselves as older people, and therefore there's become a mismatch between how long they think they're going to live and how long they're likely to live. So we asked the millennials, particularly here in the UK, but around the world, but here, that they were suggesting they're going to only live till they're 79. Well, on average, they're going to live till they're 90. And 1 in 5 will live till they're 100. So there's a huge need, therefore, for them to self-provide in their retirement for a much longer period of time. And if you align that with, at the same time, having to take much more responsibility for your individual savings over the longer term, the sort of paternalism, if you like, of the state and employers had to inevitably change as we have this ageing population, which is great news for us as individuals. Medical sciences are keeping us alive, that's great. But that comes with some challenges. Those challenges are having to fund pension funds and schemes for much longer than was initially anticipated. That cost has become almost prohibitive. So the state's provision is much less than it was in the past. And we've moved to this situation of defined contribution pension away from a something based on perhaps a final salary or an average salary to create a pot for you to generate your pension from. Now, if people haven't really had the education as well early, as we talked about just now, and the personal finance, it's quite easy to suddenly you get to perhaps retirement, you've got a pot of money and you think, wow, this is amazing, this is the biggest pot of money you've probably ever had, outside of a house if you've been fortunate enough to own one, and maybe seeing that money fleetingly go in and out of a bank account if you've sold it and want to buy another one, or even if you're downsizing perhaps. But for that younger millennials, they're looking at this kind of, right, well, what do I want to have in retirement? I'm only going to live until I'm 79. I want to retire early because that's deemed to be a measure of success in society. I question whether that is, but want to retire around 62 and enter semi-retirement around 57. That in itself has challenges. I want £27,000 a year in income, and I think I need a pot of £167,000 to generate that. Now, I'm afraid not even Blackrock, with our financial capabilities, could create a situation for you to be able to do that to last you for 25, 30 years. So,
the numbers just aren't there, are they? It's a very big gap.
Indeed, and even if you took off, let's say £8,000 from that to say that's your state contribution, so there's £20,000, there is still £250,000 gap for individuals to try to get that. Well, how is that happening? It's really interesting. It's when you actually then gone into the detail, millennials are actually saving enough money to meet that requirement outside of the state. You go, really? You go, yeah, they've saved, on average, about £1,900 over the last 12 months. That's actually enough, using this wonderful thing, the eighth wonder of the world, as Einstein called compounding. So the compound interest, if you let your money work for you over the very long term, yes, markets can go up and down, particularly at the moment they're very volatile and looking fragile, but if you can look through that and you're being asked to invest for 40, 50 years, let that money work for you, invest it, try not to get too concerned over these short-term movements, much easier said than done, but if you can, that money will work really hard for you, and at the same time pay off your debts earlier, because they're saving £1,900 a year, but they actually have nearly £4,000 in debt outside of mortgages, so credit card debt, personal loans. Not surprising really if you think they've come out of university with these student loans. It's the kind of the norm. You'd be much better off paying off that debt, running that cash balance down. I understand it is a comfort blanket, you feel better because I've got some money in the bank, but you're paying interest rates, multiples of what you're actually receiving in from your savings. So
yeah, I think it's a very difficult concept for a lot of people to sort of get around, is knowing that while on the one hand, it's great to have a savings account, which obviously it is, if on the other hand you remain with credit card debt and other sort of fairly expensive types of financing, there's almost no point in having any savings, because that will more than eradicate the benefit that you have on your savings account, especially given that interest rates have been so low for so long. So maybe it's interesting just to paint a picture, just for people watching this, of how ideally you should perhaps run through your financial future. So maybe starting with somebody who leaves university with obviously a student loan, which many people do in this country, in the UK and globally now, and maybe give some advice around that and how they could go through their lives, hopefully.
So you should be looking at obviously you've said the word there, your life, and think of yourself in the round. So what interest rates are you paying on that debt, and what will you get back from any savings that you have? If there's a big gap between those two, you're better off paying off some of that debt earlier as you can, because that will have a meaningful impact to your longer term wealth, given that wonder of the world compounding, because as it works for you when it's positive, it works against you when it's negative. So and it keeps compounding up. So you think, oh, it's only a few £1,000s in debt, but it just keeps going, and you're in effect wasting your money servicing this debt on an ongoing basis. So try to pay that off as soon as you can. have a plan. Our research, our Investor Pulse research suggests that if you have a plan, it doesn't mean you've got to see a financial advisor. It could be that you've gone on social media, you've spoken to your friends, your family. If you have a plan, you are twice as confident and in control of your financial future than if you don't. Really simple little things like that. Have goals, have plans. Where am I going? What am I trying to do? A bit like if you go to the gym. If you just go to the gym just to get on a bicycle and go to a few spinning classes, or pump a few weights, or whatever it is that you particularly like about going to the gym, you're probably just going to peter out over time because there's no goal. What are you trying to achieve? If you go there with a plan saying, I want to get fit in this way, or I'm trying to achieve this goal, I want to do that triathlon or this half marathon or climb Kilimanjaro, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, perhaps for charity, you're much more likely to stick to it. And that's the same for your financial plan. If you've got a plan, you're just more engaged. So if you can get more engaged early, that has a meaningful difference for your longer term trajectory. It's a bit like a golf ball. Don't play golf anymore, wasn't very good when I did, but a very slight deviation of a golf ball at the point when you hit it has an extraordinary difference to the trajectory of where it lands, hopefully on the fairway, not in the rough as mine did. But if a tiny little adjustment early on in that swing as you start your process can make a huge difference to your long-term process. It may not seem like it when you're living through it. Oh, that's fine, I've got lots of time. But there's an interesting start. People think you should have a bank account as soon as you can, get a piggy bank, put money in it. That's right, that's a good idea. And most people have bank accounts opened by their parents that are about the age of 10. They actually don't start investing until their mid-20s. It gets back to that gambling point. It's gambling. 60% of people think it's literally gambling. I could lose all my money. And of course, in certain very risky investments, it is possible that you may lose all of your money. I'm not suggesting you necessarily put all of your money on that,
no.
But in a well-diversified strategy that can grow over time, meeting your outcomes, those goals that we talked about, you can actually not only afford to get onto the housing ladder, you will have hopefully a very rewarding and happy retirement, which could ultimately be about a third of your life. If you are going to aim to retire at 62, maybe living to your 90, that's a long time.
Yes, it's a very long time, and a lot of people need a lot more in their retirement than they first expect, and a lot more than they actually do when they're not retired. So there's a very big misconception about how much you need to retire on. So that's really interesting. One of the things that you brought up in your talk, which I saw when we first met, was some of the innovative ideas that you're using as a business, or that you're starting to put together. So we saw something there about the use of smartphone technology. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about those type of gadgets, which I think are fantastic, especially to connect with younger people or people who really aren't into the financial industry in general sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is still quite nascent for our industry, and we're way behind others here. I have to ask the question why, because it is the future and how people will engage. I know how I engage on the internet, etc. It's on my smartphone. It's not. I don't necessarily sit down at a PC and start to surf the net. It's not how we do things now. The world has changed, so we need to be much more mobile enabled. We need to, make it as easy to get to save as it is to get into debt at the point of access. Make it digitally. Can I ID myself? Once you've done that, once it's you, there's a whole heap of apps that can be developed off the back of that. Aggregation, micro savings. These all exist at the moment, but they're not joined up. I can have a holistic view of, right, I can see it's you. As an advisor, if you want to get some help, you need to go and see that coach or your personal trainer, to use that gym analogy from earlier. Then I can really quickly get a full picture of you. I haven't got to spend a couple of weeks going to find all this information. If you so wish, if you let me in to access all of your financial circumstances from all of these companies, I can do that really quickly. So I've massively reduced the cost of me helping you. So it's literally just my face-to-face time and guiding you in a certain direction, rather than sort of like the iceberg, 90% of my time I've had to spend actually working out where all your things are. And inevitably, because we change jobs 11 times on average during the course of our career, and we move house about 7 times, you're going to have forgotten some stuff. So I will have forgotten there's a life
especially
policy
paperwork.
Here. There you go. Wouldn't it be great, and this is what we've got to get to, that you could update your information once and it just pushes out to all of your financial services providers. So all your pensions are updated, even your council tax, everything's all done just once.
That would be great, yeah.
So I think that's what we're trying to get to. That, I think, drives engagement right from the very beginning.
So how can people, perhaps watching this, start, people, younger people or people even in their 20s or 30s who start to think, actually this makes me want to start doing something about my pension, and perhaps thinking about that. How would you suggest that they start by going about that process?
So point 1, absolutely, if you're in employment, your employer will offer you a pension. Take advantage of it. Get them to match, do the maximum you can. So in effect, get that free money. And most of them, if you can, they've got different contribution rates per company, but if you put £1 in, they'll quite often put the £1 in for you. So
match contributions are very popular now.
I've got £2. That's great. And let that start compounding for you. You'll even get a contribution from the government, which is, it's couched in very difficult language for most people to understand. You get tax relief for your marginal rate of income tax. Most people just, their eyes glaze over and go, I don't know what my marginal rate of income tax is. And I think that's a really important point, because if people understood that there was a match, not just from their company, but also from the government, even though it's not technically because it's coming from tax receipts, but it is. Because if they put, it's only cost you to put £1 in, it's cost you 80p, let's say. You've put 80p in and there's £2 in your pension.
Fantastic.
That's great. Well, let's start articulating that in a way to people understand. So give me 80p, government will put 20p in, and your employer puts £1 in. That's much more akin to the, hang on a minute, so if I buy 4, I get 1 free. That's now, you're putting it in a consumer language, and I think that's something that government, regulators, industry, we just need to do that in terms of, because that's the way you start to get engagement and people going, hang on a minute, yeah, it makes sense. Also, how about joining up some of those very big decisions that at the moment they're compartmentalised. People go, as millennials, I want to get on the housing ladder, so I'm going to save for a house, and they tend to save for a house first by putting the money in the bank. Okay, I get it, because you don't want it to go down necessarily in value, but if you're going to save for a house deposit, average house in the UK, a couple £100,000, just under, means you need 20% deposit for that. That's the typical deposit nowadays. You're going to need almost £40,000 to pay that. That's a long time putting your money in a bank account where you're earning not very much, 1-2% if you're lucky. You're going to be saving into that bank account for 15-20 years to achieve your first time deposit. Is there a way of joining up some of these decisions so that you just get people saving and, more importantly, investing? And if they can do that, and you can encourage people to utilise that pot, I think you start to break down these barriers of compartmentalisation, difficulty, and almost obfuscation in terms of language use. Because, say, marginal rate of income tax, you can get your tax relief at, most people, myself included, when I was in the 20s, just got, really don't know what you just said to me. I think that's good, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's been really insightful and interesting, so thanks for coming by. I think the probably key takeaways from that are, first of all, pay down your debt. Second of all, start thinking about your whole life approach, really, as you go along. Don't see it in different compartments. And thirdly, start thinking about your pension from as young age as you can, and hopefully through the participation of your employer. Now in the UK it's becoming much more compulsory to have those sort of pension schemes at work, so do make the most of them. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.